Welcome back to LPBW Update, your number one source for the latest news and deepest insights into the Roloff family. Today, we are delving into a story so shocking, so deeply unsettling, that it has the potential to rewrite everything we thought we knew about Matt Roloff's relationship with Caryn Chandler. We're going beyond the headlines and into the dark territory of insider reports and exclusive theories that are sending shockwaves through the little people, big world community. The official narrative is that their engagement ended, but sources close to the situation are now whispering about a chilling possibility. A theory that suggests the breakup was the final, explosive chapter of a much darker story. What if the wedding was being pushed for reasons far more sinister than love? What if it was all part of the ultimate con, a terrifying manipulation designed to trap Matt Roloff by exploiting his deepest fears? Before we dive into the explosive details of what might be the most calculating deception in reality television history, do me a favor and hit that like button. If you're as invested in the Roloff family as we are and want to stay on top of every breaking story and exclusive theory, make sure you subscribe to LPBW Update and ring that notification bell so you never miss a thing. You are not going to want to miss a single second of this. For years, viewers have watched the unfolding romance between Matt Roloff and Caryn Chandler. Their relationship began while Caryn was still an employee at Roloff Farms, a fact that has always been a point of contention and quiet speculation among fans and even within the Roloff family itself. After Matt's long and often tumultuous marriage to Amy Roloff came to an end, Caryn stepped into the role of the patriarch's partner. Their journey culminated in April 2020 when Matt announced their engagement after 6 years together. He told People magazine, "Our plan is to enjoy our engagement, and we are looking forward to a simple but elegant wedding in 2024. It seemed, for all intents and purposes, to be the happy ending Matt had been looking for, a fresh start with the woman who had become his rock. But as the months ticked by, the initial excitement surrounding the engagement began to fade, replaced by a strange sense of inertia. The planned 2024 wedding date came and went, with no invitations sent, no venue booked, and no concrete plans announced. Insiders started to murmur that behind the smiling photos and loving Instagram posts, there was a growing tension. The wedding, it seemed, was being indefinitely postponed. Sources close to the couple began to paint a picture of disagreement and hesitation. Matt, who had been through a very public and emotionally taxing divorce, was reportedly feeling petrified of walking down the aisle a second time. In a candid moment on the show, he even expressed his fear that marriage could change the dynamic he and Caryn shared, questioning the need to fix something that wasn't broken. He and Caryn had built a life together, splitting their time between Arizona and Oregon, but the final step of legal marriage seemed to be a hurdle Matt was increasingly hesitant to clear. Caryn, on the other hand, was reportedly growing more and more anxious. She had sold her own house in Oregon, a clear signal that she was all in, ready to fully merge her life with Matt's and become Mrs. Roloff. Yet, she found herself in a state of limbo, cohabitating in a house that was legally Matt's, a fact she herself pointed out with a hint of frustration. She had given up her home, reoriented her life, and was now facing the unnerving possibility that the wedding she had banked her future on might never happen. Her influence, once paramount in Matt's life, felt like it was waning. The power dynamic was shifting, and Caryn, a woman known for her take-charge attitude, was feeling the ground move beneath her feet. It is in this environment of uncertainty and rising desperation, sources theorize that a dark and calculated plan began to form. It started subtly, so much so that at first, it was easily dismissed as the normal aches and pains of getting older. Caryn began to complain of a mysterious and persistent fatigue. She seemed to be tired all the time, a deep, bone-weary exhaustion that sleep couldn't fix. Then came the complaints of pain, a vague but constant discomfort that seemed to migrate around her body with no clear source. Matt, ever the devoted partner, was consumed with worry. He suggested countless doctors and specialists, but Caryn was always a step ahead. She claimed she was already on it, that she had an appointment with a top specialist, a leader in their field. Conveniently, this renowned doctor was located in another city, a considerable distance away. This detail, insiders now point out, was the first crucial piece of her strategy. It ensured Matt couldn't easily attend appointments or become directly involved in her medical care. He would have to rely entirely on the information she fed him. She would travel for these consultations alone, returning with somber updates about the battery of tests she was undergoing. The narrative was carefully controlled, delivered with a performance of weary bravery that elicited nothing but sympathy and concern from Matt. The deception escalated. After one of her solo trips, Caryn returned with news of a biopsy. The word alone hung in the air, heavy with terrifying implications. The wait for the results, she claimed, would be agonizing. Matt was a wreck, his mind racing with worst-case scenarios. He tried to be supportive, to stay positive, but Caryn's demeanor was one of quiet dread, subtly preparing him for the worst. The day the results came in was, according to insider reports, a masterclass in emotional manipulation. Caryn came home in a flood of tears, collapsing into Matt's arms. She told him the news he had been dreading. She had cancer, but it wasn't just any cancer. She claimed it was a rare, aggressive form, the kind that doctors didn't have easy answers for. The prognosis, she said, her voice choked with emotion, was uncertain. The treatment would be grueling, and there were no guarantees. She had a fight on her hands, a fight for her very life. Matt was, by all accounts, completely shattered. The thought of losing Caryn, the woman he had planned to spend the rest of his life with, was unbearable. He pledged to be by her side through every step of the ordeal. But Caryn had another carefully planned move. She insisted on handling all communication with her doctors herself. When Matt offered to speak with them to get a better understanding of the diagnosis and treatment plan, she would tearfully refuse, saying it was all too painful to have others involved, that she needed to process it on her own terms. She was effectively isolating him from any potential source of truth, creating a closed loop of information where she was the sole gatekeeper. With Matt consumed by a potent cocktail of fear, grief, and a desperate desire to protect her, Caryn made her move. It was the moment her entire deception had been building towards. In what insiders describe as a heartbreakingly tender and utterly fraudulent conversation, she laid her trap. "My one dream, Matt," she allegedly said, her voice trembling as she clutched his hand, "is to die as your wife. I don't know how much time I have left. Please, let's not wait." The words were a dagger to Matt's heart. All his previous hesitations about marriage, all his fears and doubts were instantly vaporized by the sheer emotional weight of her supposed final wish. How could he deny the dying request of the woman he loved? The vague timeline of an uncertain prognosis created the perfect sense of urgency. It wasn't about a big, fancy wedding anymore. It was about a race against time. She pressured him gently but relentlessly to plan a small, immediate ceremony. It wasn't about the celebration. It was about the legal and emotional security of being his wife before it was too late. This, she framed, was her only wish, the one thing that would bring her peace in her final days. For Matt, there was no other choice. He threw himself into planning the wedding, a somber and rushed affair driven not by joy, but by a sense of impending tragedy. Caryn's plan was working perfectly. She had manufactured a crisis so profound that it overrode all of Matt's anxieties, forcing his hand and pushing him toward the altar to secure her legal and financial position as his wife. While Matt was lost in a fog of grief and frantic wedding planning, others in the Roloff orbit were beginning to feel a prickle of unease. The story, as relayed by a distraught Matt, had holes. It was all too vague, too dramatic, and too convenient. At the center of this growing skepticism was Amy Roloff. Despite the complex and often painful history between her, Matt, and Caryn, Amy felt a sense of duty. She had built a family with Matt, and his pain was something she couldn't ignore. She decided to make a grand gesture of support, something to show solidarity in the face of this terrible news. Her plan was to send a massive, beautiful floral arrangement to the renowned oncology clinic where Caryn claimed to be a patient. It would be a symbol of peace, a message that in times of crisis, past grievances could be set aside. Amy placed a call to the clinic, a top-tier facility whose reputation was impeccable. She explained the situation, asking to have the arrangement delivered to Caryn Chandler's room or for it to be held for her at her next appointment. The head nurse on the line was patient and thorough. She checked the inpatient records. No one by that name. She checked the outpatient registry. Again, nothing. The nurse, sensing the caller's concern, rechecked everything, spelling the name out, looking for any possible variation or administrative error. Finally, she returned to the line with a definitive, chilling answer. "I'm sorry, ma'am. We have no patient by that name, and our records show we never have." Amy was stunned into silence. She ended the call, her mind reeling. It had to be a mistake. Maybe she had the name of the clinic wrong. She double-checked with Matt, who, in his grief, confirmed the very name she had called. A cold knot of dread began to form in Amy's stomach. This wasn't a simple misunderstanding. This was a lie. Her first call was to Zach. The relationship between Zach and his father had been strained for years, fractured by the bitter feud over the future of Roloff Farms. Zach had long been wary of Caryn's influence over his father, and he listened intently as his mother recounted the conversation with the clinic. He wasn't surprised, he was horrified. His own suspicions, which had been simmering beneath the surface, now had a concrete piece of evidence to latch onto. He knew he couldn't confront his father with just one phone call. Matt was too emotionally invested, too deep in Caryn's narrative. He would dismiss it, accuse them of trying to sabotage his happiness. They needed something more. They needed undeniable proof. It was then that Zach had an idea. He had access to some of his father's financial accounts to help him with business matters. With a heavy heart, he logged into the credit card statements that he shared with his father, the one that Matt often used for travel and major expenses. His goal was to find the travel expenses for Caryn's treatments, flights, hotels, anything that would corroborate her story of seeing a specialist in another city. He scrolled through the recent charges, his eyes scanning for airline tickets and hotel chains. He found them. There were indeed charges from the city where the specialist was supposedly located. For a moment, his heart sank, thinking maybe his mother had been wrong. But then he looked closer at the specific dates of the transactions. They corresponded exactly with the days Caryn was supposed to be undergoing grueling chemotherapy sessions. But the merchant names weren't a hospital or a medical facility. The charges were for a luxury day spa. There were multiple receipts, one for a deep tissue massage, another for a deluxe facial, and a third for an all-day pampering package. The woman who was supposedly fighting a rare and aggressive cancer had been spending her treatment days being massaged and moisturized at a 5-star resort. The image was so grotesque, so sociopathic, it made him feel sick. This wasn't just a lie. This was a monstrous, cold-blooded deception. He now held the smoking gun. The question was, what would happen when they fired it? The task of confronting Matt was a delicate and daunting one. Zach and Amy knew that a direct, accusatory approach would only cause him to shut down, to retreat further into Caryn's web of lies. They had to be gentle, to present the evidence not as an attack, but as a painful discovery born from genuine concern. They chose a quiet moment when Caryn was out of the house to sit down with him. They started by expressing their love and worry for him, acknowledging the terrible stress he was under. Then, Amy calmly recounted her phone call to the oncology clinic. She told him exactly what the head nurse had said, emphasizing that they had checked and rechecked their records. Matt's initial reaction was denial, just as they had expected. He claimed it must be a mistake, a privacy policy issue, or that Caryn was perhaps registered under an alias for her own protection. He was grasping at straws, trying to hold the devastating narrative together. It was then that Zach, his voice steady but heavy with sorrow, gently pushed the printed credit card statements across the table. He didn't say much. He just pointed to the dates of the supposed chemotherapy, and then to the corresponding charges from the luxury day spa. He asked his father simply to explain it. Matt stared at the papers, his face draining of color. He looked back and forth between the dates and the itemized charges. A massage, a facial, a day of pampering. The words swam before his eyes, each one a testament to an unthinkable betrayal. The two pieces of evidence presented together were irrefutable. The fact that the clinic had absolutely no record of Caryn, combined with the spa receipts from her chemo days, created an undeniable picture of a sociopathic-level deception. There was no explanation, no possible misunderstanding that could make sense of it. The horrifying truth began to dawn on him, crashing down with the force of a physical blow. The woman he was about to marry, the woman whose supposed dying wish he was about to fulfill, hadn't just lied to him. She had weaponized his deepest fears. She had used the specter of death itself, the most profound and terrifying of human experiences, as a tool in a cold, calculated con to trap him in a marriage. The entire health crisis, his gut-wrenching grief, his frantic race to the altar, it was all a fabrication, a sick piece of theater designed for her own selfish gain. He was not a loving fiancé granting a final wish. He was the mark in a long con, and he had fallen for it completely. The reckoning had begun. The aftermath of the revelation was a storm of raw, unfiltered emotion. Matt's world had been turned upside down, the foundation of his reality shattered into a million pieces. The grief he had felt for Caryn's impending death was instantly replaced by a new, more profound grief. The grief for the love he thought he had, the trust that had been so cruelly violated. According to sources who witnessed the fallout, Matt went through waves of disbelief, rage, and a deep, soul-crushing sadness. He locked himself away, refusing to speak to anyone, trying to process the enormity of the betrayal. He had to confront the woman who had done this to him, but how? What could he even say? The confrontation, when it finally happened, was reportedly explosive. When Caryn returned home, blissfully unaware that her scheme had been exposed, she walked into a tense and heavy silence. Matt, his face a mask of pain and fury, simply laid the evidence on the table. The phone call log from Amy and the credit card statements from Zach. He didn't need to say a word. Caryn's reaction, insiders claim, was not one of remorse or shame. Instead, she allegedly flew into a rage, turning the tables, accusing Amy and Zach of trying to sabotage their happiness, of fabricating evidence to drive a wedge between them. She tried to gaslight Matt, to make him believe that he was the one being manipulated, not by her, but by his own family. But the proof was too solid, the deception too clear. Her desperate denials and angry accusations only served to confirm her guilt. The fight was said to have lasted for hours, a brutal, ugly affair that tore down everything they had built together. In the end, with her lies fully exposed and her back against the wall, Caryn was forced to leave. The engagement was over. The wedding was off. The great con had failed. The news of the sudden split sent shockwaves through the little people, big world community, but the public story was, of course, a sanitized version of the truth. On July 22nd, Matt released a statement on Instagram, a carefully worded announcement that spoke of parting ways amicably. "Caryn and I have decided to part ways and end our engagement," he wrote. "Life's a continued journey, and this is the right step for us at this time." The statement was bland, professional, and gave no hint of the dark drama that had transpired behind the scenes. For the public, it was just another reality TV couple calling it quits. But for those in the inner circle, the truth was a closely guarded secret, a bombshell too scandalous and too painful to ever be made public. The family had to protect Matt from the humiliation of the truth getting out, the truth that he had been the victim of such a cruel and elaborate hoax. They closed ranks, presenting a united, if somber, front. The official narrative would be a simple, mutual breakup. But the real story, the story of the faked illness, would remain buried, known only to a handful of people. In the weeks and months that followed, Matt Roloff was a changed man. The cheerful, optimistic patriarch was gone, replaced by a more somber and introspective individual. He threw himself into his work on the farm, using physical labor as an outlet for his emotional turmoil. The dream house he had been building with Caryn stood as a hollow monument to a future that was now a lie. The trust that had been so central to his character was deeply damaged. He became more isolated, more wary of the intentions of those around him. The ordeal had left a permanent scar on his psyche. He had been forced to confront the horrifying reality that the person he had loved and trusted most in the world was capable of a level of deception that was almost beyond comprehension. It was a betrayal that would haunt him for years to come, a cautionary tale about the dangers of vulnerability and the darkness that can hide behind a loving smile. The ultimate con was over, but the emotional cost was a debt that Matt Roloff would continue to pay for a very, very long time. And it leaves us all with a chilling question: how well do we ever really know the people we love? And what other secrets remain buried beneath the carefully curated surface of reality television? The intricate details of Caryn's alleged plan reveal a level of premeditation that is truly disturbing. Let's break down the psychological chess game that insiders believe she was playing. Her choice of cancer as the weapon was deliberate and brilliant in its cruelty. It's a disease that evokes immediate and universal sympathy. It is the ultimate trump card in any emotional conflict. By claiming to have a rare and aggressive form, she accomplished several things at once. The rarity made it difficult for anyone to question the specifics of her symptoms or treatment. It wasn't a common illness that people would have a baseline of knowledge about. The aggressive nature of the supposed cancer created the ticking clock, the sense of urgency that was essential to her plan of forcing a quick wedding. The uncertain prognosis was another masterstroke. It allowed her to manipulate the timeline as needed. If Matt was dragging his feet, the prognosis could suddenly become more dire. If things were moving along, she could offer a sliver of false hope to keep him engaged and compliant. It was a narrative she could bend and shape to her will, all while playing the part of the tragic, brave victim. Her insistence on controlling all communication with her fictional doctors was another cornerstone of the deception. In any real medical crisis, a loving partner would be intimately involved, attending appointments, speaking with physicians, researching treatment options. Matt's exclusion from this process should have been a major red flag, but Caryn framed it as an act of self-preservation, claiming it was too painful for her to have him involved in the grim details. She played on his empathy, convincing him that by backing off, he was respecting her wishes and helping her cope. In reality, he was being walled off from the truth. This isolation made him completely dependent on her for all information, turning her into the sole narrator of her own fabricated tragedy. He had no way to verify her claims, no one to ask the tough questions. He was a captive audience of one, and she was delivering the performance of a lifetime. The manipulation went even deeper when she presented the marriage as her dying wish. This was a piece of emotional blackmail so powerful it was almost impossible to resist. To deny such a request would be to paint oneself as a monster. It transformed the wedding from a celebration of a future together into a sacred duty, a final act of love for a dying woman. It completely reframed the situation, removing any possibility of rational discussion or delay. Matt's own desires and fears became irrelevant in the face of this overwhelming emotional pressure. He was no longer a partner in a decision. He was a caretaker fulfilling a final obligation. The choice of a distant, out-of-town specialist was another calculated detail. It added a layer of legitimacy to her story while also serving the practical purpose of keeping Matt away. It would have been far more difficult to maintain the lie if she were supposedly being treated at a local hospital where he could easily visit or where they might run into people they knew. The distance created a buffer, a space where her lies could grow without the risk of being exposed to the harsh light of reality. And the most audacious part of the entire scheme was the luxury day spa. It speaks to a level of arrogance and a chilling lack of conscience. To be so confident in her deception that she would indulge in spa treatments on the very day she was supposed to be receiving life-saving chemotherapy is a mark of a truly sociopathic mindset. She wasn't just lying, she was reveling in the deception, using the money and freedom it afforded her to pamper herself. This detail transforms the story from one of desperate manipulation to one of cold, predatory fraud. It reveals that there was no genuine fear or desperation driving her actions, only a calculated desire for personal gain and a complete disregard for the emotional devastation she was inflicting on the man who loved her. The smoking gun wasn't just the lie itself. It was the casual cruelty with which it was executed. It was the image of her wrapped in a plush robe while Matt sat at home, his heart breaking, believing she was fighting for her life. That is the detail that elevates this from a simple lie to an act of profound psychological evil. Now, we must ask ourselves, what does this say about the ecosystem of reality television itself? For years, Little People, Big World has presented a certain version of the Roloff family. We, the viewers, are invited into their homes, their lives, their conflicts, but we only see what the cameras show us, what the editors choose to piece together into a compelling narrative. This story, this insider theory, rips the curtain back on that carefully constructed reality. It suggests that what happens off camera can be far darker and more complex than anything we see on our screens. It raises the question of how much of what we watch is genuine and how much is performance. Caryn, having been a part of the show for years, would have understood the power of narrative better than most. She knew how to play a role, how to evoke sympathy, how to create drama. Is it possible that the lines between her real life and her on-screen persona became so blurred that she saw her own relationship as just another storyline to be manipulated for a desired outcome? The show itself creates an environment where personal drama is currency. The more compelling the storyline, the more secure your place on the show. Could this have been a factor in her thinking? A desperate, high-stakes attempt to create the ultimate storyline, a tragic illness, and a deathbed wedding that would guarantee her a central, unassailable role in the Roloff dynasty? It's a disturbing thought, but one we cannot ignore. This alleged deception is not just a personal betrayal, it is a betrayal of the very premise of reality television. The idea that we are getting an authentic glimpse into the lives of real people. It serves as a stark reminder that behind every edited scene, behind every tearful confessional, there is a complex and often hidden reality. And sometimes that reality is a carefully constructed lie. This story, if true, is a game changer. It forces us to reevaluate everything we thought we knew about Matt and Caryn and casts a long, dark shadow over the entire legacy of Little People, Big World. The happy farm, the family struggles, the quest for love. It all looks different now, tainted by the possibility of a deception so monstrous it almost defies belief. Let's dive deeper into the tangled web of this alleged deception, because the confrontation and the breakup are not the end of the story. They are merely the beginning of a long and painful process of rebuilding. The emotional shrapnel from an explosion, this massive touches everyone in the vicinity. And for the Roloff family, it meant re-examining years of interactions, reevaluating relationships, and coming to terms with the fact that a master manipulator had been living in their midst. To truly understand the gravity of the situation, we have to move beyond the event itself and explore the psychological fallout for each person involved, starting with the man at the center of the storm, Matt Roloff. The man who emerged from the wreckage of this relationship was not the same one who entered it. The initial shock and rage, while potent, eventually gave way to something far more insidious, a profound and crippling sense of humiliation. Matt Roloff has always prided himself on being a savvy businessman, a shrewd negotiator, a man who can read people and situations. His entire identity is built on being a visionary, a problem solver, the patriarch who is always 10 steps ahead. To be so thoroughly and completely duped, to have his love and empathy weaponized against him in such a spectacular fashion, was a blow to the very core of his being. He wasn't just heartbroken, he was emasculated. The shame of it, according to insiders, was almost unbearable. He had defended Caryn to his family, particularly to Amy, for years. He had positioned her as his partner, his equal, his trusted confidant. Now, he was forced to confront the fact that his family's suspicions, which he had long dismissed as bitterness or jealousy, had been right all along. He had to face his children, not as a wise father, but as a victim who had needed rescuing from his own poor judgment. This reversal of roles was a source of deep personal shame. Every memory of his time with Caryn became tainted, subject to a painful new lens of scrutiny. Was any of it real? He was forced to rewind the tape of their entire relationship, searching for clues he had missed. Every tender moment, every declaration of love, every shared dream was now suspect. Did she ever truly love him, or was he simply a means to an end from the very beginning? Was her initial interest in him, back when she was still a farm employee, part of a long-game strategy to eventually usurp Amy's position? These are the questions that reportedly haunt him in the quiet hours of the night. The trust he had placed in her was absolute, and its demolition left a void. This wasn't like his divorce from Amy, which was a slow, painful erosion of a long-term love. This was an assassination of trust, a sudden and violent act of psychological warfare. The experience, sources say, has made him deeply cynical about the motivations of others. The open, often naive optimism that was once a hallmark of his personality has been replaced by a guarded, weary skepticism. The dream house, once a symbol of his future, now stands as a monument to his folly, a constant physical reminder of the life he almost got trapped in. The process of healing for Matt will not be about getting over a breakup. It will be about rebuilding his own sense of self, his ability to trust his own judgment, and learning to live with the knowledge that he was capable of being so profoundly deceived. Now, let's turn our attention to the unlikely hero of this story, Amy Roloff. Her role in this drama is layered with a rich and complex irony. For years, she was painted as the bitter ex-wife, unable to move on, uncomfortable with Caryn's presence in her old home and in her old life. Her reservations about Caryn were often framed as jealousy, a petty refusal to accept Matt's new happiness. But that one phone call to the oncology clinic recontextualizes everything. Her actions were not born from malice, but from a deep, abiding sense of connection to the father of her children. Despite their painful divorce and their many disagreements, she could not stand by and watch Matt be consumed by what she suspected was a lie. Her decision to make that call was an act of profound, if complicated, love. She put aside years of personal hurt and stepped in to protect him. Imagine the vortex of emotions Amy must have experienced. There would have been a moment of quiet, grim vindication. She had been right all along. Her instincts about Caryn, which so many had dismissed, had been proven tragically correct, but any sense of triumph would have been instantly overshadowed by a deep sorrow for Matt's pain. To see him so broken, so utterly betrayed, would have been heartbreaking for her. This was not a victory. It was a tragedy that she had been forced to uncover. In a strange and unexpected way, this crisis may have been the beginning of a true healing process for Matt and Amy's relationship as co-parents and grandparents. By saving him from this deception, Amy demonstrated a loyalty that transcended their romantic history. She proved that when it truly mattered, the foundation of family they had built together was stronger than any subsequent relationship. It repositioned her not as the nagging ex-wife, but as the matriarch who, when faced with a threat to her family, acted decisively. The event allowed her to move forward with her own life with Chris, secure in the knowledge that she had done the right thing, closing a painful chapter not with bitterness, but with a final, difficult act of grace. Zach and Tori Roloff were thrust into the role of co-conspirators in this painful intervention, and for Zach, it represented a critical turning point in his relationship with his father. The feud over the farm had created a chasm between them. Zach felt slighted, disrespected, and undervalued. He had publicly criticized his father's handling of the negotiations, and their communication had become strained and resentful. But the discovery of Caryn's deception forced him to put that anger aside. His actions, logging into those financial statements and finding the undeniable proof, were those of a protective son, not a bitter business rival. He stepped into a paternal role for his own father, guiding him out of a dangerous situation. This act had the potential to fundamentally reset their dynamic. It was a powerful reminder that their bond as father and son was more important than any dispute over property or money. For Zach, this was likely a moment of maturation. He had to handle the situation with a delicacy and strength that went beyond his years. He couldn't just storm in yelling, "I told you so." He had to collaborate with his mother, strategize the confrontation, and deliver the devastating news with a compassion that would allow his father to hear it. It was a heavy burden to bear. This event likely solidified Zach's position as the true heir to the Roloff legacy, not in terms of property, but in terms of character and family leadership. He, along with Amy, became the guardians of the family's well-being. For Tori, her role would have been one of unwavering support for her husband. She would have been the sounding board for Zach, the one who helped him navigate the emotional complexities of what he had to do. As someone who had also expressed her own quiet reservations about Caryn in the past, she would have understood the stakes. Together, they formed a united front, demonstrating that their branch of the Roloff family was built on a foundation of honesty and mutual protection. The crisis, while horrific, may have served to strengthen their own marriage and clarify their priorities, pulling them closer together as they worked to pull their family back from the brink. While the main drama unfolded with Matt, Amy, and Zach, the shock waves would have inevitably reached the other Roloff children, each of whom would have processed the news through the unique lens of their own relationship with the family and the show. Let's consider Jeremy and Audrey. Having stepped away from Little People, Big World to cultivate their own brand based on intentional living, faith, and covenant marriage, this news would have been a bombshell. They have always positioned themselves as advocates for a more traditional and spiritually grounded approach to relationships. Caryn's alleged deception would likely be seen by them as the ultimate cautionary tale, a horrifying example of what can happen when a relationship is not built on a foundation of absolute truth and shared values. It would validate their decision to distance themselves from the often messy reality of the show and reinforce their own brand's core message. They would feel deep empathy for their father's pain, but it would be filtered through their own ideological framework. The scandal would serve as a stark contrast to the life they have so publicly curated, highlighting the perceived dangers of the secular reality TV world their father still inhabited. Then there is Jacob Roloff, the family's prodigal son and most vocal critic. Jacob has openly spoken out against the artificial nature of reality television, claiming it created a false and often toxic environment for him growing up. For him, the news of Caryn's elaborate con would not have been a surprise, but rather the ultimate logical conclusion of a life lived for the cameras. He would see it as the most grotesque manifestation of the inauthenticity he has always railed against. In his eyes, Caryn wasn't just a con artist, she was a product of the very system that rewards dramatic, fabricated storylines. He would likely feel a deep, sorrowful anger on his father's behalf, but also a sense of intellectual vindication. This, he might argue, is what happens when you blur the lines between real life and entertainment, when you invite people into your life whose primary motivation might be to secure their own storyline. His perspective would be the most cynical, viewing the entire affair as an indictment, not just of one person, but of the entire reality TV industrial complex that his family has been a part of for decades. He would see Caryn's alleged actions as a symptom of a much larger disease. To fully grasp the calculated nature of this alleged con, we must examine the financial stakes. This was not just about securing the title of Mrs. Roloff. It was about securing a significant financial future. Matt Roloff, through his decades on television, his various books, his public speaking engagements, and most importantly, his valuable real estate holdings, has amassed a considerable net worth. Roloff Farms, even with the portion sold off, remains a multi-million-dollar asset. As his girlfriend, Caryn's financial position was precarious. She was dependent on his goodwill. But as his wife, she would have been entitled to a significant portion of his estate. In the state of Oregon, a spouse is legally entitled to a substantial share of their deceased partner's assets, often overriding what is written in a will. By faking a terminal illness, Caryn wasn't just manipulating Matt into a wedding. She was, in theory, fast-tracking her inheritance. The narrative of a dying woman's last wish would have made it seem crass and inappropriate for anyone to bring up the idea of a prenuptial agreement. How could Matt ask a woman on her supposed deathbed to sign a prenup? It would have been seen as a cold, heartless act. The illness was the perfect tool to bypass the normal financial safeguards of a wealthy individual entering a second marriage. The plan was, in its alleged financial dimension, diabolically clever. It aimed to secure for her, in the shortest possible time, what Amy had earned over 27 years of marriage and raising a family. Had the wedding gone through, Caryn would have been legally locked into Matt's finances. If the lie of the illness had continued and she had decided at some point to have a miraculous recovery, she would have already secured her position as his wife. If, in a darker turn, something had happened to Matt, who is not without his own health challenges, she would have been positioned as the grieving widow, inheriting a substantial fortune. This financial motivation adds a layer of cold, predatory greed to the entire affair. It reframes the deception from a desperate act of an insecure woman to a calculated heist of a family's legacy. It was about securing the kingdom, and the faked cancer was her Trojan horse. With the benefit of this horrifying theory, we can now look back at the history of Caryn's time on the show with a new and unsettling perspective. Were there red flags that viewers in the family missed? Think back to the early days of her relationship with Matt. Amy frequently expressed a sense of unease, stating on camera that she was uncomfortable with the fact that Matt had become involved with a farm employee while they were still married. At the time, this was often portrayed as Amy's inability to let go. But in this new light, was it Amy's intuition picking up on a calculated social climb? Was she sensing an agenda that others, including Matt, were blind to? Consider the episodes surrounding the sale of the farm. Caryn was often seen as a major influence on Matt's decisions, positioning herself as his business partner and strategic advisor. Her involvement was a major point of contention for Zach, who felt that she was overstepping her bounds and inserting herself into a family matter. Was her firm stance against selling the farm to the kids part of a larger strategy to secure the entire asset for herself and Matt, and by extension, for her own future? Were her whispers in Matt's ear not just the advice of a loving partner, but the strategic moves of a chess player with her eye on the ultimate prize? Even her on-camera persona can be re-examined. She often presented herself as the calm, capable, no-nonsense caretaker, the one who could manage Matt in his ambitious projects. But was this competence a genuine personality trait, or was it a carefully crafted role? The role of the indispensable partner, the woman without whom Matt's life would descend into chaos. By making herself essential to both his personal and professional life, she solidified her position, making it unthinkable for him to ever leave her. She became deeply embedded in the fabric of his life, not just as a romantic partner, but as a logistical necessity. Looking back, this gradual, systematic integration into every facet of Matt's world can be seen not as a natural progression of a relationship, but as a methodical takeover. Each step, from employee to girlfriend to fiancé, was a calculated move in a long campaign, with the fake illness intended to be the final checkmate move. It is a chilling rereading of the past decade of the show, one that transforms a simple love story into a sinister narrative of infiltration and betrayal. The clues, it seems, may have been there all along, hiding in plain sight, dismissed as the normal drama of a complicated family, when in fact, they may have been the breadcrumbs leading to this one devastating truth. The greatest cons are the ones where the victim never even realizes they're a mark until it's far too late. And for Matt Roloff, the realization came just moments before he was about to willingly hand over the keys to his entire kingdom.